Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we're addressing the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. Join us each week as we spark a midlife renewal and create a firm foundation for the next wonderful, exciting, awesome season of life.
Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. It's great to be here with you. I'm Curtis. I'm here with my fellow host, Karen.
Hi, everybody. It's Karen.
So today we're going to continue talking about happiness, striving for happiness, because it's important in everything you do. Strive for happiness. It helps us as Catholics, as people, and that's why we're talking about it.
That's exactly why. And I'm really super glad we are talking about it, because I think we often consciously prioritize certain elements of happiness and flourishing. Perhaps we prioritize relationships or achieving a certain something, but we don't often step back as a whole and look at how am I investing in my overall happiness and well-being. And really, it's part of this alignment of our mental, emotional, and physical self with our spiritual realities and bringing all of that into alignment.
So you're like an apple. You're like all one thing. I mean, there it is.
Yes,
Boom, there it is.
I guess you could
An
say
embodied person.
that. I hadn't ever thought of that particular image, but now I will ponder the apple.
There's no reason you should ever have thought of it, I think.
It's really hard to underestimate the difference that happiness makes in your life and in your external outcomes. And I don't know if you remember this, Curtis, but there's this story about Martin Seligman, the positive psychologist. And he was out in his yard doing yard work, and his daughter was young, like maybe 5 or 6. And she said, "You know, Daddy, do you remember when I was 4 and I had to learn to stop whining? And it was really hard for me, but I learned how to stop whining." And he said, "Yes, I remember." And then she said, "Well, I think if I could learn how to stop whining, you could learn how to stop being so grumpy." And he really took it to heart. He thought, I could learn to be less grumpy. And there's actually a lot of really good reasons why I would want to do that.
No, and I think it's just Martin Seligman. He's like a master psychologist, and maybe he could learn not to be grumpy. But I don't think that's a standard that the rest of us can be held to.
No, dear, no. See, here's what he learned is that you can do certain things that will help you to be less grumpy and shift your overall emotional state. And you can learn how to be more positive. You can actually control your positivity if you do the right things.
I'm not sure how I feel about this news.
Oh, well, I'm sensing this could be an interesting conversation for later.
Sensing some resistance.
I am.
Well, I hear you. It really reminds me of putting the kids to bed. And there was a phase where I would really yell at them. They were at a certain place and I was at a certain place. And I kind of worked through that and, used some different approaches.
Mhm.
And so we had all 3 of them in the same room. And our middle daughter one night said, "Daddy, you used to really yell at us a lot going to bed, but you don't anymore. You've really grown in that area."
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that.
So I was like, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for affirming me.
Thanks for affirming you. That is right. And you did. I remember you consciously decided to work on that, and it was noticed
Yeah.
and appreciated.
So we have a lot of control, and
Mhm.
we have to face it in a sense that we have a lot of control, and we can choose happiness. Choosing it is important. Think about, Karen, you mentioned aligning the spiritual and the mental and the emotional. We have all this great spiritual life. We want it to work through our systems. Last week, we were talking about Seligman's model of the pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life. And the meaningful life is generally associated with using your strengths, your best virtues, your highest values in the service of something bigger than yourself. And that starts to remind you of something as a Catholic, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Yeah. So in Matthew 22:37, in response to the question to Jesus about the commandments, he says, well, the first and greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind.
Mm.
Second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. And as we strive for happiness, as we're trying to integrate the spiritual, the mental, and the emotional, trying to love with your heart, with your soul, with your mind, because God made us for happiness. And that's why we want to be with him. We want to be happy.
We do. We do want to be happy.
And it's a good desire. He gave it to us. He created us that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And isn't it nice when you know something like that and then lo and behold, there's a bunch of scientific studies that just support what it is that you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's hundreds of studies that show why it's great to be happy. Happier people are healthier, they live longer, they overcome challenges better, they're more resilient, they have better relationships, they have more career success, they have less stress and anxiety. And when people really live happier and more positively, they have better outcomes pretty much across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. We have this huge negativity bias in our brains. We're
Right.
built for survival. We're built for fitting into the group. There's so many ways that shows up for us in modern life and life more generally. It triggers our negativity bias, and it's so easy for us to shut down and not to look at the bigger picture and to think of reasons for not taking action. But when we shift into a more optimistic mode, then all of a sudden, and there's all kinds of science for this, we become more creative. We're starting to see some options. We're more willing to take action that's going to help us. We're more willing to reframe the situation and look past all those bad thoughts we have about other people and start to entertain some new thoughts that'll help us work with others.
Right, right. And one thing that's coming to me is I feel like sometimes we kind of beat ourselves up and wonder, well, why am I so negative? Or why is it hard for me to see the positive here? And it's really true. That's the way your brain works. It's going to focus on the negative. That's its natural state. And and so if we want to develop the positive mindset, the positive emotion, the positive outlook, then it takes some work and it takes an investment. It's not it's not impossible. There are things we can do, but it does take some intention and some investment. I'm thinking about the insurance company. I can't remember which one it was now, but they were really having problems in their sales department. And not only was everybody leaving in about the first year of the job, but they weren't making the kinds of sales they wanted. And they brought in a consultant from positive psychology. And the first thing he studied was the quote, explanatory style of the salespeople. So what that means is how were they interpreting and describing the kinds of events that were happening to them? So did they do it in a positive way? Like, well, I didn't get this sale, but it's okay. I'm going to keep working and it'll work out for me.
Sure, that's a tough job, right? You're,
Yeah.
you're selling insurance. You're going out there. People are shooting you down.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's
There's a
not going
lot
to
of
get discouraged from
yeah,
that?
yeah, exactly.
Right. But some people would have this positive explanatory style, and some people would have a more negative explanatory style. Like, this is bad. It's never going to get any better. I can't make this work. And and they found that it was the people with the positive explanatory style who were able to make the difference in their job and to have the kind of sales success that they wanted. But they had to highlight, and if you don't have that explanatory style, you have to work at creating it, right? For yourself in order to get the kind of outcomes that you want. And what they found was when they hired people based on their explanatory style, their turnover went way down and their sales increased by 50%.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
It's remarkable.
I remember another sales training story. This sales manager said with his new hires, or well, it was a training thing. He was out with some new people, I guess, and his job was to sell Pepsi in
Mhm.
vending machines.
Okay.
And so they went to this building and they could see in this glass stairwells the vending machines,
Mhm.
and every floor had a Coke machine.
Mm.
And so he was looking at his new people and he asked one of them, "What do you see?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "They're fully bought into Coke. I'm not sure this is the place for us to spend our time." He said, "Okay." Then he looked at the next one and said, "What do you see?" And she said, "Well, when we flip that account, we're going to get a lot of machines put in that building."
Wow. Wow.
And he said, "Yeah, that's what you got to have if you want to be successful in
Mhm.
difficult situations, is
Mhm.
be able to define the positive."
Right. Exactly. Huh. Huh. I'm thinking about the other thing that you said, which was when you can have that kind of a mindset, you really, as you said, can see the possibilities. You also can think creatively. You can find new solutions that you just don't see when you have kind of the negative explanatory style. So if it's okay, I share another story. I think this one is really funny. Is that okay?
I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay. So this is a study they did with doctors, and sometimes doctors will have this trouble when they've made an initial diagnosis and they're getting new information, of being flexible enough to shift their diagnosis and really take in the new information. So they kind of get inflexible and stuck in this one way of looking at the problem. So they took some doctors, and one, of course, was a control group, and the other group, they gave a little treat before they asked them to make the diagnosis, and just something to create some positivity. They gave them actually some candy, and they didn't even let them eat the candy. They just gave them the candy to create the positive response, and then they asked them to make the diagnosis, and they made it the correct diagnosis at least twice as quickly as the control group. And they were able to think more creatively, to think more broadly, and to think outside the box because of that.
It's so intriguing. It's such a small thing.
Yeah, totally. But it happens like that. I know it's the unexpected small things that sometimes just give you that burst of pleasure or happiness, or, "Oh, look at that, I got in line first. I didn't expect that." Or, "I got through, in 15 minutes and not half an hour like I expected I would." And that's a big boost for your brain.
So, Karen, when you asked permission to tell that story, I thought this was permission to tell a story about me.
Oh.
Just the look in your eye made me a little nervous.
Oh, that's really funny.
So anyway, that's a fun story. A lot of these studies were collected by Sean Achor, Achor, and he talks a lot about rational optimism, just the power of rational optimism and how it's predictive of success. And so, according to what he's been able to figure out, what he's observed is that rational optimism is a predictor for success.
Hmm.
So it's not the other way around. It's not that you get to a certain level of business success and then you become this optimist. It's the cause and effect runs in the other direction.
Right.
So leave it to the business guys to, reduce happiness to let's be happier so we can make more money, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So there's some irony there. But we were talking about the importance of happiness as Catholics as bringing about this alignment so we can love with our heart, our soul, with our mind. And if happiness tells us a lot, it's kind of like a barometer or something. If we're not happy, well, what's going on? Because, when we're happy, we're not giving in to the negativity. We're not giving in to the passivity. We're resisting the resentment. We're
Hmm.
resisting the revenge or whatever it is. And choosing happiness, it really is work. And, one of the biggest obstacles in spiritual life is discouragement.
Hmm.
It's discouragement. And happiness is a counter to discouragement because it requires us to trust in God,
Right.
because that is fundamental for hope.
Right.
Happiness requires hope that we are going somewhere that means something and that will result in happiness. And of course, we'll never be completely happy here on the planet until it's recreated in God's new creation and he's with us, joining us when heaven and earth come together. So happiness, trusting in God, pursuing peacefulness, that's a very powerful, positive emotion. And
Right.
there's almost nothing good that comes from us losing our peace in terms of spiritual life. We need to be able to see and hear and know and trust God.
Hmm. I'm thinking of this treatise on hope by Joseph Pieper, and he says that one of the characteristics of a truly hopeful person is they have this kind of youthful joy and experience of life that has that optimistic outlook that just lives life with kind of a freshness of outlook and interest and joy and awe and inspiration. So it just reminded me of that when you were talking that hopeful people are are positive people even in the midst of great suffering.
Well, I love that.
Hmm.
Let's strive for happiness.
Hmm.
Let's find our hope
Hmm.
and let's be those joyful people.
Okay. It's the end of our episode, everyone. So today we'd like to invite you to pause right now, whatever you're doing, and just think of one person that you think would benefit from listening to this podcast. Send them a really quick email. Just send them a quick email. Hey, thinking of you, heard this great podcast, The Catholic Midlife. Think you should check it out. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Midlife podcast. It's great to be here with you. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite app or platform. Leave a review that's so helpful so that others like you can find the podcast. And be sure to tell your friends. We'll see you next week.